Gene Simmons has always been a figure of intrigue, half rock legend, half calculated businessman. But beneath the stage persona, there lies a story far more complex than the interviews, the headlines, or the public controversies suggest. What drives a man who has built an empire from music, image, and persona? And why do whispers about his private life now make the world pause and ask, how much do we really know about him? Tonight, we peel back the layers of fame, fortune, and persona, revealing the human being behind the iconic tongue. Before the world knew him as Gene Simmons, the towering, tongue-wielding rock star who commanded stadiums and screens, he was Chaim Witz, a young boy born into a life of uncertainty and upheaval. Born in Haifa, Israel, in 1949, Gene's earliest memories were shaped by loss and dislocation. His father, a Hungarian Jewish man, and his mother, a Hungarian Holocaust survivor, carried their own scars from a world that had been brutally fractured. Growing up in the shadow of such trauma, young Chaim learned early on that life could be unforgiving, and that survival often meant adaptation. As a child, he experienced the sense of being different, displaced from the familiar, navigating cultural gaps, and struggling to find a sense of belonging. By the time he arrived in Queens, New York, with his mother at age 8, he was confronted with yet another layer of challenge, assimilation into a city alive with diversity but often harsh to newcomers. Schoolyards were arenas of judgment, and Chaim, small for his age and carrying the weight of early hardship, quickly understood the subtle dynamics of power, perception, and self-protection. This formative period planted the first seeds of what would later become Gene Simmons' public persona. He learned to observe carefully, to read people's intentions, and to manage impressions long before he ever stepped on a stage. These were not simply survival tactics, they were lessons in emotional intelligence. Chaim discovered that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but about transforming it into motivation. Every setback, every glance of judgment, every whisper of exclusion became a lesson in strategy, how to stand taller, how to demand attention, how to create presence in a world that often overlooked him. At the same time, his experiences left him with a keen awareness of identity's fragility. Who was he, truly? Was he the boy with a difficult past, the immigrant struggling to belong, or someone he could invent entirely? This internal questioning foreshadowed the creation of the demon, a figure that would embody audacity, defiance, and spectacle. Even as a child, Chaim began experimenting with ways to stand out, drawing attention with his wit, his intensity, and moments of theatricality in everyday life. By the time adolescence arrived, he was quietly preparing for a transformation that would one day captivate millions. Yet, the mask he would create was not born of vanity, it was born of necessity, a protective barrier against a world that could be cold and unforgiving. Chaim Witz's early life, filled with displacement, survival, and observation, set the stage for a man who would learn to master not only music and performance but the very psychology of human attention. But how does a boy from Queens transform into a rock icon whose image will captivate, and sometimes shock, the world? The next chapter uncovers the first steps toward the transformation that would define his life. The 1970s marked a turning point in Gene Simmons' journey, a moment when the boy from Queens began to shed his past and step into a carefully crafted future. Music had always been a passion, but it was through performance art that he discovered a way to capture attention, to command presence, and to create something larger than life. The demon was born, not by chance, but through meticulous planning, experimentation, and psychological insight. Every gesture, every costume, and every stage effect was deliberate, designed to elicit awe and curiosity. Gene understood something many artists never fully grasp: fame is not merely about talent, it is about perception. The creation of the demon was a masterclass in self-branding long before the concept was widely recognized. His towering platform boots, bat-like makeup, and fire-breathing theatrics were not just for shock value, they were a means of establishing authority, control, and intrigue. Each element was designed to blur the lines between reality and performance, leaving audiences captivated while keeping the man behind the mask partially hidden. This chapter of his life also reveals the discipline behind the spectacle. Gene approached Kiss not only as a band but as an entity, a brand, a psychological experiment in human attention. He negotiated with record labels, managers, and promoters with a keen awareness of how perception could be manipulated. He learned that image, carefully curated, could be just as powerful as music itself. Each show became a controlled environment where emotion, spectacle, and human desire intertwined, and where he could test the boundaries of audience engagement. Yet, even amid this theatricality, there was a deeper layer of purpose. The demon was both shield and instrument, a way for Gene to channel insecurities, transform vulnerability into power, and gain agency in a world that had once overlooked him. The mask was protective, but it also demanded consistency. Audiences expected the demon to be unstoppable, unflinching, larger than life. Maintaining that persona required psychological stamina, constant awareness, and a careful balance between authenticity and performance. Through these years, Gene became a student of human behavior, observing reactions, adjusting presentations, and refining the psychological blueprint that would sustain him throughout his career. The demon was not simply a costume, it was a lens through which he could navigate fame, test boundaries, and understand the complex interplay between identity and perception. The question remained, could this persona survive the pressures of fame, or would the man behind the mask be consumed by it? The next chapter reveals the costs of living in a world of extremes. With the rise of Kiss to international superstardom, Gene Simmons stepped into a world few could fully understand, a world of roaring crowds, flashing cameras, and constant scrutiny. The demon persona, which had once been a protective mask and a tool of empowerment, now became a double-edged sword. While the makeup, fire-breathing, and larger-than-life theatrics thrilled audiences, the man beneath them faced a new reality, the relentless pressure of public attention. The world adored the spectacle, but few had access to the private emotional landscape of the performer behind it. As fame grew, so did the stakes. Relationships strained under the weight of travel, media exposure, and the expectations that came with being a rock icon. Trust, always a delicate balance in any personal connection, was tested repeatedly. Friends, partners, and collaborators were forced to navigate the line between the public persona and the real person. For Gene, even simple human moments, friendship, intimacy, quiet reflection, became complicated by the constant demand to perform, to maintain an image that was bigger than life. This chapter of his journey reveals a man learning to compartmentalize like a psychological tightrope walker. He needed to present confidence, audacity, and bravado on stage while managing doubt, insecurity, and fatigue behind the scenes. Emotional resilience became not just a desirable trait, but a survival mechanism. Moments of loneliness were frequent, hidden by the roar of audiences and the glow of spotlights. Yet these moments also became a source of introspection, shaping his understanding of himself, his limits, and the costs of public life. There was a paradox at the heart of fame. The more he gave to the world, the more isolated he sometimes felt. Every headline, every photograph, every interview was a reflection not just of his achievements but of expectations imposed upon him. And yet, through the scrutiny and judgment, Gene cultivated an awareness of human psychology that few artists experience. He learned to anticipate reactions, to read both praise and criticism, and to maintain control over his narrative without fully surrendering his personal life. The chapter underscores a critical tension in Gene Simmons' life, the intersection of success and sacrifice, the balance between persona and private self. He became both a master of perception and a student of his own endurance, learning that emotional intelligence could be as vital as musical talent. The cost of fame was real, tangible, and sometimes lonely, but it also forged a psychological resilience that would sustain him in decades to come. With such success came both admiration and criticism. How did Gene navigate controversies, public perception, and the fine line between honesty and calculated image? The next chapter explores the man behind the headlines. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Gene Simmons had done more than conquer the world of rock music, he had mastered the art of business. Kiss was no longer just a band, it had become a carefully engineered brand, a cultural phenomenon, and a testament to his entrepreneurial vision. Simmons recognized early on that talent alone could only carry an artist so far. True longevity required strategic thinking, an understanding of public perception, and the ability to turn music into merchandise, concerts into spectacles, and identity into influence. He approached every decision with the precision of a negotiator and the instincts of a psychologist. From licensing action figures to creating Kiss-themed makeup, comic books, and lunchboxes, Gene transformed the band into a multi-generational franchise. Each move was informed by an acute awareness of desire, what people wanted, what would captivate attention, and how to create anticipation. By reading audiences as carefully as he read his own stage presence, he built not just a fan base, but a devoted community that saw the band as more than musicians. They were an experience, a phenomenon, an iconography. Yet this focus on empire building came with costs, both visible and invisible. Questions arose about the balance between ambition and intimacy, between financial gain and personal relationships. The demands of licensing deals, media appearances, and constant travel often strained connections with family and friends. Gene himself has reflected on these tensions, understanding that success can isolate as much as it elevates. The careful cultivation of public image, while ensuring the band's prominence, sometimes meant private sacrifices. It was a calculated trade-off, one that reveals both the genius and the complexity of a man driven by vision and necessity. Psychologically, this period demonstrates a rare form of foresight and emotional calculation. Gene's awareness of human behavior, his ability to influence perception, and his capacity for strategic risk-taking are hallmarks of someone who understood power not just as fame, but as control over narrative. Admiration for his business acumen is tempered by critique from those who question whether profit sometimes eclipsed personal priorities. Yet even critics must acknowledge the clarity of his intent and the audacity of his vision. Gene Simmons' evolution from performer to business mogul underscores a truth about fame: it is as much about management, perception, and psychology as it is about talent. Kiss became a global empire not because of music alone, but because its founder understood people, and himself, better than most. Even with unparalleled success, rumors and controversies have continued to swirl around his personal life. What truths lie beneath the headlines? The next chapter investigates the private sphere hidden from the public eye. For Gene Simmons, fame has never been a quiet companion. Alongside the adulation came intense scrutiny, speculation, and a constant spotlight on both his professional and personal life. Every statement, relationship, and public appearance was dissected, leaving little room for privacy. Even as he built an empire on visibility, he also had to navigate the weight of public perception, and the rumors that seemed to follow him like shadows. The challenge of managing this scrutiny required more than instinct, it demanded strategy. Gene developed a psychological toolkit for maintaining control over his narrative. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent, how to redirect attention, and how to manage the delicate balance between transparency and mystery. Interviews, public appearances, and even social media were carefully navigated, not as mere promotional tools, but as mechanisms for protecting the core of who he was beneath the persona. Despite these strategies, the toll of constant observation was real. Trust became a scarce commodity, and personal relationships were complicated by the glare of media and fan attention. Moments of genuine intimacy were often tested against the backdrop of rumor, speculation, and scrutiny. Yet Gene's resilience was evident. He continued to cultivate his personal life carefully, drawing boundaries while still engaging with the public on his terms. This tension, between the demands of fame and the need for self-preservation, reveals the complexity of his psychological endurance. In many ways, this period highlights the duality of Gene Simmons, the public figure who commands attention with spectacle, and the private individual who measures each step with thought and intent. It is a study in the art of compartmentalization, managing emotions, protecting relationships, and maintaining a sense of agency amid relentless observation. His ability to navigate this landscape demonstrates both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, essential skills for surviving decades in the unforgiving world of celebrity. Yet even with careful navigation, questions remain. How much of Gene is the man born Heimwitz, and how much is the carefully constructed persona of the demon? How does one reconcile the demands of a public identity with the needs of a private self? These questions linger, revealing the tension at the heart of his story and the fragility that lies beneath the armor of fame. Amidst the glare of media and fans, one question lingers: how much of Gene Simmons is the man, and how much is the persona? The following chapter offers a rare glimpse at his personal reflections. As the years advance and the intensity of life on tour begins to ebb, Gene Simmons has entered a stage of reflection, a quiet phase, away from the roaring crowds and camera flashes, where evaluation of one's life becomes inevitable. Legacy is no longer an abstract concept, it is a living question that demands honesty, insight, and self-awareness. For a man whose identity has long been intertwined with the demon persona, this reflection is both revealing and complex, offering a rare glimpse into the person behind the spectacle. Gene's assessment of his own legacy extends beyond music. Kiss may have been the vehicle that brought him fame, but his work as a businessman, brand strategist, and cultural influencer forms an equally significant part of his imprint. He examines how his choices, from ambitious licensing deals to media engagement, have shaped not just a band, but the very way celebrities interact with audiences. Each decision, each calculated risk, reveals a man who understood the psychological interplay between desire, perception, and influence. Even decades later, his approach remains a blueprint for navigating fame, business, and public attention. But reflection also brings a more personal lens. Gene evaluates his triumphs alongside his mistakes, considering relationships strained by ambition, moments where ego may have eclipsed empathy, and instances where the cost of spectacle was borne privately. There is an awareness of growth, a recognition that personal evolution is as critical as professional achievement. Through this introspection, he confronts the tension between the larger-than-life persona and the man who has lived through decades of scrutiny, performance, and expectation. This chapter highlights the psychological balance required to sustain both ego and self-awareness. Gene's reflections reveal a rare combination: confidence tempered by introspection, ambition balanced with understanding of human cost, and a clarity that allows him to observe his own actions without denying complexity. His influence extends beyond rock music, touching cultural norms, celebrity behavior, and the ways fame shapes human interaction. In understanding his own legacy, he also illuminates the patterns of human behavior that have allowed him to endure, adapt, and thrive. Yet with reflection comes uncertainty. How will history remember the demon? Which chapters of his life will remain hidden behind myth and persona, and which will define him in the public imagination? These questions linger, a reminder that legacy is not static but evolving, shaped by both the individual and the world observing them. But reflection also brings uncertainty. How will his story be remembered? And what chapters of his life remain hidden behind the myth of the demon? As the final chapter unfolds, the focus shifts from the fire, makeup, and headlines to the man who has inhabited the demon persona for decades. Gene Simmons, once Heimwitz, is revealed not merely as a rock star or media mogul, but as a deeply complex human being. The persona that captivated stadiums and defined an era is inseparable from the human experiences, struggles, and insights that shaped it. Behind the mask, there is vulnerability, humor, and a keen understanding of both human nature and himself. Over decades, Gene has learned that life under constant scrutiny demands a form of psychological agility few possess. The demon required him to compartmentalize, to balance performance with authenticity, and to navigate the delicate space between public expectation and private truth. While the public saw flamboyance, defiance, and spectacle, Gene's personal evolution reveals a man who continuously negotiates identity, self-awareness, and personal growth. Each interview, each public appearance, each calculated gesture is informed not only by strategy but by lessons learned through decades of observation, trial, and reflection. In stepping away from the mask, we see moments of introspection and humor that illuminate the human being beneath the legend. He reflects on relationships, on ambition, on the cost of fame, and on the choices that led him to mastery over both image and narrative. There is honesty here, an acknowledgement that the persona is as much a shield as it is a performance. Yet this reflection is not colored by regret, it is a recognition of the complex balance required to thrive under extraordinary circumstances. Psychologically, Gene's story is a study in adaptation and resilience. His ability to navigate fame, manage perception, and sustain personal growth demonstrates a profound understanding of human behavior. The demon is, in many ways, a lens through which he could explore the world, test boundaries, and maintain agency in a public life that offers little privacy. Yet behind that lens lies the real man, thoughtful, witty, and introspective, aware of the gap between legend and self, and constantly negotiating that divide. As this chapter, and the story, draws to a close, it leaves the audience with a nuanced reflection. Fame and spectacle may define public perception, but the private human experiences, the struggles, the resilience, the personal philosophies, remain central to understanding the person beneath the mask. Even a life lived under lights and headlines is layered with subtle, private truths, and it is within those layers that the real story resides. As the story concludes, one question remains for the audience to ponder: can we ever truly separate the legend from the man?